My guest at this time is Mark Mix. He is the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. He joins me today as Democrats in Virginia try to roll back the right to work there. And Mark, thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure, Greg, and thanks for taking an interest in this topic. It's an important one.
This is being proposed by a freshman delegate named Lee Carter, who is an avowed socialist and even campaigned using a video shredding your letter asking him to fill out a survey for the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. So you guys aren't exactly on the best of terms, to put it mildly. What does he want to do in this legislation?
Well, we certainly don't hold any animus against him other than the fact that we gave him some Twitter content where he could show the letter that we sent him, just asking him to share with Virginians where his views were on the issue of compulsory unionism. And he decided to make a fun little video of it, shredding the letter and with a big sign behind his shredder, and has made good on his promise. I mean, you have to give the guy credit. He told people that he would introduce a repeal of Virginia's right to work law that's been in effect since 1947 that simply says that no worker in Virginia can be forced to pay union dues or fees to get or keep a job. That's the bill. That's the statute that exists, and that's what he's trying to overturn. Not a surprise. Virginia is an interesting state politically. I think it's kind of the tale of two cities, if you will, from a standpoint of electoral politics these days. But yeah, it's been a long time since we've had a fight over the right to work law in Virginia. In fact, going back to 1991 was the last time a bill had any traction at all in the legislature. But it appears, with the margins the way they are and the political climate changing the way it has, that this delegate is going to make an aggressive effort to try to force Virginians to pay union dues to work.
Now, from what I've read about his legislation, which, if you're following it in Virginia, is HB 1806, it explicitly creates what are called agency shops, which are different than union shops. What's the difference, and why does it matter?
Yeah, the vernacular is kind of interesting here. The union shop, as it was defined in history, was the idea that you had to be a formal member of the union. You had to join a union to work at a particular workplace. With the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act and then some litigation that occurred back in the early 1960s, the courts said that you could not be forced to be a formal member of a private organization, but you could be forced to pay up to 100% of dues. So the idea, the unions will say, well, no worker is forced to join a union or will ever be forced to join a union, but you'll be forced to pay up to 100% of dues to keep your job, which is pretty much basically a union shop. Union officials had to create kind of semantic differences so that they could say that, yeah, no one's forced to join a union. You're just forced to pay dues to work. And that's really what this bill is about. The idea of agency shop has come into this notion that you have to pay something to work, and that's what this bill would do. You can't say you must be a formal member, which would be the, quote, union shop of the 1930s and before, but you do have what would be considered a closed shop, meaning that if you didn't pay your dues, you couldn't work.
We're talking with Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. And Mark, obviously we'd have to go back to prior to 1947 to get a real good idea of this, but I'm sure based on your efforts to get right to work passed in other states, you can answer this pretty well, and that's what's the economic impact overall and the impact on people trying to find work in Virginia if this were to get through?
Yeah, Greg. I mean, the economic data is becoming more demonstrable all the time. The states that have passed right-to-work laws, and 5 states have done that in the last 6 years, have benefited economically. I mean, first of all, it's an issue of freedom, individual freedom and choice and liberty in a workplace. I mean, nothing in Virginia's right-to-work law stops you from joining a union if you want to, or giving your entire paycheck to a union official if you choose to do that. Nothing on the books does that now. So this notion that somehow we've got to dramatically switch things is ridiculous. But from an economic standpoint, for example, in Kentucky, that passed a right-to-work law back in early 2017, they've had their best year in job growth and economic investment in their state over the last 2 years, and they've had in any other year in the history of the state. It's just been incredible, and many of the companies locating there, manufacturing facilities, service facilities, to those manufacturing facilities, are citing the passage of the right-to-work law as a reason why they're deciding to go to Kentucky. So Virginia has the possibility of losing that attractive element of their economic development package, which really says, look, if you come to Virginia, union officials can't control your workforce to the degree that they can force you as an employer employer to make these people pay union dues to get or keep a job. I mean, if you want to have a union, you can have one. But the idea that you can force someone is really what the right to work law protects. And that is an economic advantage for the states that have it, and also a personal liberty and freedom issue for those that get to practice that as well.
So if I'm living in Virginia and this doesn't affect me, I'm working in the private sector, it's not a unionized situation, so whether it passes or fails, it doesn't directly impact me, but you're saying that in the big picture, it will.
Well, absolutely. I think it will. And obviously for union officials in states that have right-to-work laws, there's really less incentive to go out and organize workers, because at the end of the day, what union officials are looking for is compulsory fees. That's their revenue stream. In a state, would you invest $100 million in a state to organize all its workers knowing that you couldn't guarantee a payback because they have the protection of a right-to-work law? If you put it in another context, if you go to New York State and you are able to unionize a company, it is highly likely that all those employees will be forced to pay you dues or fees to keep their jobs, because it's not a right-to-work state. In fact, in state employment, prior to our win in the Janus decision back in June of 2017, which protected all government workers across the entire country with right-to-work protections, in New York State, it wasn't even negotiated. If you got a job with the state, you paid union dues in order to get that job. So the union officials look at it from a standpoint of a business model, saying, okay, now it's profitable to go into Virginia and organize, because if we win a unionizing campaign, we can force those workers to pay fees as a condition of getting or keeping a job.
I would imagine that those in favor of repealing right to work don't pitch the fact that you have to pay dues even if you don't want to. I assume their argument is that, well, the union's going to negotiate a better deal for you, and it's only right that if they're negotiating a better deal for everyone and you benefit from that, then therefore you should be willing to pony up. Is that pretty much their argument?
That's pretty much it, Greg. And the kind of the nuance of that argument, if you kind of unpack what you just explained and how union officials explain it in these positive terms, basically what we're talking about here is a fight between union officials and the rank and file workers they claim to want to represent, because ultimately that's what this is all about. They're trying to force those workers who they quote unquote speak for to say, you got to pay us for the privilege of working. It's a fight between union officials and workers. It's not a fight between anybody else, because if they are really doing a good job in states like Alabama that have a right to work law, union density in that state is higher than states that don't have right to work laws. States like Iowa have a union density that's higher, which is a right to work state, than states that don't have a right to work law now. So the idea that union officials are providing services is the best attractant for workers who want to have someone speak for them in the workplace, and hopefully raise their wages, but not through the power of compulsion.
Mark, I know that political prognostication is not what you get paid to do on a daily basis, but with Republicans still narrowly, and I'd emphasize narrowly, holding the majorities in the House of Delegates and the state Senate, do you expect this to get much traction this year? From what I'm reading so far, the GOP leaders don't really have much intention of moving on this.
Well, I can't speak for the legislators down in Richmond, and certainly political deals happen all the time. The fact is, we've got to let Virginians know what's at stake, and I think once the word is out and once word gets out that this is really a special interest bill to empower union officials over workers in the Commonwealth of Virginia, people will respond, and I think the politicians understand that. I mean, when we've had contested fights over right to work in the past, it's not been a winning issue to be on the side of compulsion, and the bill couldn't be any clearer. As you said, Greg, you've looked at it. It's pretty straightforward. It says you have to pay dues in order to work, that these types of agreements compelling people to pay dues will be legal in the state of Virginia. And I think that's not very good marketing. But then again, this gentleman is not bashful about his desire to force workers to pay union dues or fees to get or keep a job.
Well, we'll certainly be following this fight. And Mark, as you well know, you and I will be talking about something before too long, whether it's in the courts or in the halls of the legislature somewhere. We'll talk again soon.
Appreciate it, Greg. Appreciate you bringing this information out. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.